Did he say move up? Kyla's voice drifted over from the rear. Through the chorus of shifting boots, stomping and squeamish noises, Ludmilla could barely hear Howe's call from ahead of them somewhere. The cockroaches kept coming, and the party continued in their efforts to squash them as they came. The ichor drenching the stones made footing hazardous, the stench was stomach-turning, and the sound of countless rustling limbs made for a chorus of its own. Fortunately, none of the insects that came from whatever traps they had triggered were as monstrously huge as the few they had come across in the rooms, or they would surely have been overrun by now. Not that it made things any better for their fighter in the rear guard. "See, come on, someone say something," Kyla shouted over the din again. "Can we move now? Please." Not willing to risk her breaking up their formation, Themis had cast an enchantment on the wavering fighter to help keep her calm as she fought. Though it didn't completely eliminate her fear, Kyla was doing markedly better, fighting with clean and measured movements one would have never expected out of her given her previous state of near-mental collapse. She used her shield to crush a half-dozen crawling along the wall beside her, then 2 more on the ground in front with the flat of her sword. Her methodical defense continued even as she asked for updates from the front. "I'm pretty sure he did, yes," Ludmilla said as she brought her own shield down to smash several cockroaches that were creeping through. Though she had come into the Adventurer Guild with the idea that her years of training as a child to fight on the frontier would give her an edge in combat, their current situation flew in the face of what she considered common sense. She ended up discarding the notion of using weapons in a regular fashion, as her usual armament was ill-suited to dealing with so many small targets. Those that had shields were using them to kill as many as they could with every attack. Those without them used their torches to ward the cockroaches away, or stepped on them when they saw one skittering too close. "Let's catch up to him, then," Henrich said. "We should be almost through if the pattern of the floors is the same." They dashed over to where Howe waited, leaving the writhing black mass behind. The slowly growing rustle of thousands of legs behind them was an ever-present reminder that they were still being trailed. "I only see one big one, but it's probably 3 going by how things have been so far," Howe said calmly as they approached. "If we can handle it like the 3rd room up top, we should be clear, right?" "Will we actually?" Pen was doubtful. "Now that we have this endless parade of bugs following us everywhere, who's to say they won't keep following us? I can't think of any way to stop them." "If we wait, we'll lose any advantage we have tackling the next room," Ludmilla said. "Let's take Ad." Her words trailed off as cockroaches started to crawl out of the cracks in the hall. Like the previous corridor, their entry as a party triggered the release of yet another source of them. Howe followed her gaze, swinging his torch around, and he cursed as the glistening dark bodies reflected the light. Several dozen were killed as they emerged from the walls, but, like the sections of the tomb before them, there seemed to be an unlimited number of them that steadily filled the hall. "Whoever came up with this is insane," Kyla cried. "In what world do people have to fight this many cockroaches?" "Okay, let's attack," Henrich said as he kept swatting at the insects crawling out of the walls. "Once Ludmilla kills the first one, we'll take the other 2 that come out. I'll hold one and Kyla can hold the back while everyone else gets the other." After everyone gave their affirmative, Ludmilla set her shield and spear down to draw her bow, releasing an arrow into the giant cockroach patiently waiting for them. It settled to the ground, dead, but nothing came out to rush them in response. They waited for half a minute, but nothing came out to charge them. The stuff behind is almost caught up," Kyla's voice nudged at them. "Let's go then," Henrich said. "If they're waiting, we'll deal with them as fast as we can." As they approached the entrance to the room, the gleam of light reflected off of a second giant cockroach in the back. Henrich advanced on the insect, which was half hidden behind a crumbled stone column. "Watch my back, I'm going for that one there," he said as he stepped forward, brandishing his warhammer. Not 3 meters into the room, a third giant cockroach detached itself from the ceiling and landed on Henrich's head, knocking the fighter prone. The second enemy exploded into action when he fell, skittering by Howe and Ludmilla, who both managed to sidestep its charge. Pen and Themis were not so quick and were bowled over. What?" Kyla cried in surprise. The giant insect leapt onto her back, the impact driving her face first into the awaiting swarm behind the party. The 4 adventurers looking back to her winced in unison. "Kyla, are you all right?" Ludmilla asked worriedly as Howe went to deal with the cockroach that was still clinging onto Henrich. Kyla groaned, trying to regain her feet with the weight of the giant insect fastened to her back. She managed to rise to her knees before freezing. "Oh no," came Themis' shaky voice. "The enchantment is off. I don't have the mana to sustain it." The cockroach clacked its mandibles several times next to Kyla's ear. It let out a loud hiss from its body and an expression of abject horror filled the fighter's face. "Hold on, Kyla." Ludmilla moved forward to try to detach the giant cockroach. "I'm coming to get it." He? With a cry born of primal terror, Kyla snapped. She heaved herself back to her feet and sprinted straight back the way they had come, with the cockroach still attached to her back, clinging on with everything it had. She plowed through the squirming stream of insects as effortlessly as a death knight plowed a field. Seeing the defender in front of them flee, Pen ran after her. With one fighter fleeing and one of their supporters rapidly disappearing back up the hall after her, Ludmilla turned to call back to the remaining two party members. Kyla ran off, Ludmilla said to Hau and Henrich, who had just finished off their opponent. Pen followed her. Themis wobbled forward a few steps before falling to her knees. Ludmilla helped her back up again, lending the cleric her shoulder. "We have two on the way out and Themis is in no condition to continue," Ludmilla said. "Maybe we should withdraw?" "The stairs are right there, though." Henrich pointed to the exit of the room. "They didn't say how many floors we'd be going through," Ludmilla replied. "Maybe there's a man-sized roach waiting for us in the next room. The way back up is still clear, we should play it safe." The remaining members of the party exchanged glances. "This is as far as we go, I guess," Henrich sighed. "Let's get out of here while we still can." With Henrich bringing up the rear, they backtracked through the halls. Kyla's passing had agitated the cockroaches even more, and now thousands of them were scurrying everywhere and flying through the air in short bursts. They gave up all attempts at fighting, covering their heads to follow after their fleeing party members. "Magic arrow." Pen's voice echoed down the stairwell as they ascended. The spell was cast again before they finished climbing the stairs. The corpse of the last giant cockroach greeted them when they reached the top. In the hallway ahead was the squirming pile of cockroaches that had been released by the pressure trap. Pen was breathing raggedly, winded from the mad dash to the second floor. Kyla was frozen by the sight of the creeping blockage before her. "Do you still have that alchemist's fire, Pen?" Ludmilla asked. "Eh? Yes, I do," Pen answered between breaths. "How does it work?" When the solution is exposed to enough of the air, it will ignite. If you just unstop the vial, it would take a dozen seconds or so." "How much did it cost?" 1 silver? Riesti's coinage." "I'll buy it." Ludmilla held out her free hand in front of the mage. Pen fished around in her belt pouches until she located a large vial of crimson-tinted glass, placing it into Ludmilla's palm. After feeling its weight for a moment, Ludmilla unstoppered the vial with her teeth and tossed it at the base of the writhing mass. It shattered and the contents immediately ignited. The burst of flame caused the insects to recoil as one. Many immediately died from the intense heat, but many more simply fled. Several scurried towards them with their abdomens on fire, which jolted Kyla into a fresh run up the hall. Ludmilla paid Pen, then adjusted Themis' weight over her shoulder before moving forward again. 5 minutes later, the cool and blessedly fresh night air greeted them outside. After being inundated by the putrid odor inside the tomb, even the hints of charred grass that lingered on the breeze smelled sweet. Pen had collapsed onto her back, staring up at the stars overhead. Kyla came to a stop near the edge of the ruin, staring blankly at nothing in particular. Hau and Henrich appeared moments later, jogging out of the tomb's entrance. Little but the rustle of grass and the sound of labored breathing filled the air as the group caught their breaths. "You?" Kyla made a curious noise. Ludmilla turned her head to see the fighter standing at an odd angle. She spun and hopped several times in the twilight. "Kyla? I can feel one in my armor," she whimpered. "Error. Get out." Her face was distraught as she continued to dance around while grabbing at her gambesine. "Let me see." Hau came forward and tried to locate the intruder, but was having little success with Kyla moving about. "Hold still, damn it." "Do you see it? Did you find it?" "Oh gods, I can still feel it crawling around." The more the rogue tried to isolate the insect, the more energetic its struggling became. Kyla's panicked breaths and soft cries became even more pronounced. "What are you doing?" Her voice was desperate. "It's moving around even more. It's going to bite me, isn't it? Please don't bite. Don't bite." Ludmilla thought she saw the lump where the cockroach was crawling under the layers of fabric. Letting Themis down to rest on the grass, she walked over and pinned the thing in place with both hands. It was one of the ones about the size of her hand. She could still feel it struggling even as its movements were sealed. With the sensation of its squirming concentrated on a single spot, Kyla let out a pitiful noise. "I got it," Ludmilla said. "Just stay still, Wheel." Henrich's hand came flying in, smashing the lump in the fabric. There was an audible crunch as the force of his punch shattered the body of the cockroach. A pungent odor filled the air, and the stain of ichor from the squashed insect spread out through the fabric where it had met its end. "Got it," he announced triumphantly. Ludmilla let go and backed away as Kyla turned around to face Henrich with an expression halfway between disgusted horror and betrayal. Tears started to run down her cheeks, followed by a soft sob. "Ah!" Henrich unconsciously took a step backwards while raising his hands. He didn't get to finish what he had to say, since Kyla's gauntleted fist crunched into his jaw. Henrich made half a turn before wobbling to the ground in a heap. "I hate you so much," Kyla seethed through her tears. A moment later she ran to the nearest tree, doubling over with her hands on her knees. The sounds of retching filled the evening air, and Ludmilla looked over the mostly broken remains of her team as the wind blew over the ruins. She wondered what the results of their test would be, if their examiners could even make any sense out of it. "Did that count?" Utrecht asked. Probably," Mary said. "They didn't advance to the 4th floor, so technically that didn't count?" Jocelyn mused. "Like hell it didn't." Mocknage scoffed. "That was way harder than just walking down the stairs to the next floor." As the mirror of remote viewing followed the party slowly limping back to Irantal, the assembled veterans acting as proctors discussed the outcome. Gazing at the scene in the mirror of remote viewing, Einsack mulled over his thoughts as the women of the party accompanied the sobbing Kyla back while Hau and Henrich followed some distance behind. It would be just a bit of an understatement to say that they had taken a detour from the expected route. It's pointless to say that it technically didn't count. Blair leaned back in his chair, fingers drumming on his desk. "We put them in again and Kyla can just smash her way through everything by herself, provided she's willing to do it." "What about just upping her to iron then?" Ilan proposed. "She did the most damage to the party's enemies and her own party. She laid out that other fighter with a single punch." "I'm not opposed to that," Einsack agreed with the motion. "I picked out the ones that appeared to already be iron rank or better in the first place for this session. 4 of them clearly are, at least." It's hard to tell for Pen," Ilan crossed her arms. "This type of scenario is a bad fit for the spells that she currently has. We should run her through again with different opposition to see what she's really capable of." As novel as this experience was, copper rank casters don't have much in the way of spell diversity. We can address this over time, but any new recruits coming in, especially people from elsewhere, are going to have the spells that they think they'll need for old adventurer work. "My thoughts for Themis run along similar lines," Blair added. "She can clearly hold her own, but most of her mana looks like it was dedicated to keeping Kyla stable. I'd like to see how she handles a more conventional situation." "I have no problems with the Ranger and the Rogue," Mary chimed in. "The Rogue especially. Did he learn his craft from someone?" Einsack flipped through the profiles in his dossier, scanning through the contents of House quickly. "It says he's former city militia, a new guy," he told the others. "Seems he grew up learning from his father, a thief-taker in the militia. House started working for the city on his own a year or so ago." "Might explain why he acts like that," Mary pondered the description. "He's too straight-laced for a footpad or some petty crook. Why'd he drop out of the militia?" "You can probably guess." Einsack looked up from Howe's file. "A bunch of the militia quit after seeing that they were just plain outmatched by His Majesty's forces deployed around the city. Most of the ones that remained are either too old to change their vocation or working in customs and other duties that don't revolve around having muscle. There's probably some use still for a thief-taker. I wonder if he just saw a better opportunity here, despite his upbringing. "All's the more to our gain, if he can get to gold or higher," Mary said. "Someone of his caliber will be pretty popular for parties." Einsack nodded. Flipping through the sheets again, he found the remaining party member. "I'm on the fence about Henrich, actually," he admitted. "He's solid enough, but he's also pretty." "Normal?" offered Utrecht. "Kinda." Einsack twisted his mouth in thought. "It's hard to put a finger on it, but something along those lines." "He's reliable, level-headed and appears to have good judgment," Jocelyn said. "In a very plain sort of way." The description floated close to the mark, and several of the other proctors nodded. Looking at it from another angle, Mocknage said, "There's nothing really outstanding that I saw that would hold him back. He did his job, and everyone walked home. That's what matters, right?" It seemed that they were in agreement. Einsack looked to Mare just in case he had something to say, but he appeared to be speaking to someone via magic, whispering to no one in particular with his back facing the rest. The guildmaster decided to move on to the most immediate issue identified during the session. "So we have one big problem," he addressed everyone in the room. "Well, this is the biggest one, at least." The assembled veterans straightened to pay attention at the shift in his tone. Mare turned around from his conversation and walked back to join them. "It's not as pronounced of an issue at lower ranks," Einsack said, "but it definitely will be by silver. The trainees were too conservative with items, probably because they know it's training." Mary had burst out laughing when Ludmilla paid for Penn's vial of alchemist's fire, as the sorceress appeared to be hesitating over its use. It was a ridiculous exchange that would not normally happen in a life-or-death encounter. I can raise the difficulty," Mare offered. "That's one thing we should do, just a tiny bit," Einsack nodded at Mare, "but it's just one out of many parts of the problem at hand here. Everyone has a different budget for items, and copper ranks usually have very little discretionary income to work with. That ranger is a noble, so she can probably afford to start shoring up the weaknesses that she's noticed, but regular recruits can't do that." This was a problem that had completely blindsided Einsack when it became evident in the training session. It was a vestige of the old ways of thinking where all the risk was shouldered by individual adventurers, their own well-being was their own problem. Going in, he actually had the opposite worry, that adventurers would attempt to trivialize their trials by overstocking on items but, save for probably a handful of rare cases, it was an unrealistic worry in hindsight. "That's a tough one," Mocknage said, resting his chin in hand. "Ideally we want everyone on the same measure, but, at the same time we can't exactly force people to buy specific items with their own coin. Maybe the stipends for each rank need to go up so they can afford these purchases?" Utrecht came forward with the most apparent solution. "That's probably not a good idea," Jocelyn countered, shaking his head. "It's coin, after all. Maybe most will do what is expected of them, but it's pretty much guaranteed that we'll end up with spendthrifts. We've all seen it in the past, men and women that come back from a job and they drink it away by the end of the week." "Put together kits then," Ilan said. "There's still enough Magician Guild members to cater to the few trainees we have. They can handle putting together sets of potions and other expendable items if you order them in advance. That way, everyone will be equal going in." "That seems fair at first," Einsack said after thinking for a minute, "but it might do more harm than good. Learning what to purchase and when to use it for any given situation should be a part of training. If we simply tell them what to do, they might end up not being able to figure things out on their own. Even worse, it stifles their creativity and keeps the guild as a whole from developing new approaches to problems both old and new. We'll lose our edge." There was a long silence with everyone at an apparent loss for a solution. A sharp thump snapped Einsack out of his thoughts. "Points," Mare exclaimed as he tapped the butt of his staff on the wood planks of the floor. Looking around at the startled faces, he lowered his voice. "Sorry. Points?" Einsack prompted the training area manager to explain what he meant. If you want them to learn how to spend, but you don't want them to spend gold coins, then make something else for them to spend. Just don't let them spend more than they have." His ears drooped a little. "The others will yell at you if you do that." "Ah, I get it," Ilan caught on to his idea. "The guild budget can be used to purchase adventuring supplies which are, in turn, only purchasable using the points that they accumulate. Since we know what sort of income each rank of adventurer has now, we can adjust the prices accordingly. Won't it lead to the same problem? Mary said, it might be more of a pain, but they can turn around and sell the items at market prices to get coin, then we're back to square one. Actually, it's worse since members will treat it as an extra source of income. The proctors can keep track of the items they use during training sessions, Ilan explained. The guild will repurchase those items at the end, so there's little chance of their being sold or misused. I dare say we can use this for everything: potions, expendable items, even equipment. Since equipment is pretty distinct, they can keep those on them. It's hard to make excuses for a missing weapon or suit of armor. Eintzak crossed his arms in thought as he cross-examined the idea in his head. At least on the surface, it would tie up many of the problems that he foresaw neatly. If we offer equipment through this point system, he brought up the first issue that rose in his mind, won't we wind up back at square one? People will save up for permanent equipment over more temporary items. I don't think that's a problem, Moknich said. Unless they're aiming too high. Even then, with our control over the training curriculum, being too frugal will be a punishment in itself. Adventurers will want to climb ranks as quickly as possible to earn more and start going on expeditions, so being too cheap will cost them more in the long run. As long as the prices are realistic, everything should sort itself out. So if someone hoards their points, they'll be dead weight, or at least underperform, Eintzak concluded. The proctors will clearly be able to see this. I think so, Moknich affirmed. As we get better at assessing member performance in training, we'll be able to spot those problems. Well, so long as the proctors have a relevant base of experience to the party. This might take a while to figure out, Eintzak muttered, but I think it's a solid idea. Doing this will also help our members get used to their equipment and items before being fielded on expeditions. It would also give the guild a lot of clout in the market for magic items that individual adventurers don't have. If we play it right, the crafters might even come to us to sell their goods. The adventurers shopping around the city and beyond can inform us of useful items and equipment that we can add to our inventories. It should give us a good handle on prices as well, Utrecht added. Adventurers get played by merchants all the time. With this, we have the information and bargaining power to keep things reasonable. This feels like it's going to be a hard sell with the administration, Eintzak sighed. The Sorceress Kingdom's resources are focused mostly on domestic matters at the moment. The Prime Minister doesn't seem the type to be amenable to this sort of thing when she has bigger priorities. What do you think, Mayor? I don't know. The Dark Elf was intently following the conversation, but it seemed he couldn't speak for the royal court. Albedo likes lots of details, so maybe if you put together enough that makes sense, it might help convince her. Eintzak had a passing thought that he might broach the subject with His Majesty, but requesting an audience with what effectively amounted to a budget increase seemed extraordinarily presumptuous. Mayor's thought at least provided a basis should it come to that. All right then, he decided. We'll start off with the budget that we haven't worked the basics of this point system out, starting from the bottom on up. Once I think we have enough to make a convincing presentation, we'll run this by a few people before going to the royal court. Maybe Moman will have a thing or two to say. Don't forget spells too, Ilan said. Should we suspend training until we're ready to adopt this? Moknich asked. No, Eintzak shook his head. It's too long of a delay. Even if we decide on how things will work, we still have to consult with the Magician Guild and the Merchant Guild to secure the supplies that we need. With the rush for everything this spring, I have no idea when we can actually get a hold of some of the equipment we need. That's true, Utrecht nodded. Everything is so crazy right now with all the projects going on and the planting season in the territories. I went to get my armor repaired after that clobbering today and found out that all the forges are tied up for at least a month straight. That's going to cause problems as trainees advance, Eintzak sighed. Frontliners will be barely scraping by on light armor going into silver rank, and it will only get worse as more and more of them start looking for magical equipment. We should be able to get a stockpile of potions and such soon, so the newbies should be able to get through iron fine, but it looks like somewhere between silver and gold will be the wall until we fix our other supply issues. Eintzak rose to his feet as their course for the near future appeared to be set. In the mirror, the returning party was still only halfway back to the city. That's it then? Blair asked. That was the big problem, yeah, Eintzak said. A few of the rest might depend on how quickly we can set up this point thing. I had some thoughts about providing general information and pointers for various roles, but that will be something we have to put together after identifying problems over multiple sessions. A manual or something similar would be more suitable towards that end. How about classes, then? Ilan asked. The Mage Guild sometimes holds workshops and lectures for their members, or at least they used to. That's never really been an adventurer thing, Utrecht said. We've mostly always been learn-on-the-job types. Never mind that, I can't even imagine me teaching any sort of class, personally. That sort of thing will probably take a long time to set up, Einsak said. Our new mandate demands a whole lot of unfamiliar things, so I'm not confident that any veterans would be able to teach classes until we've mounted a few expeditions and learned what's needed ourselves. Does anyone have anything else? Something that we can deal with right away? I got one thing, Mary said. We need traps that we can work with. Those built-in traps can be made to be detected easily, but, since they're a part of the facility, they're basically impossible to disarm without some heavy-duty work. It's good in the sense that our scouts will need to figure out when to leave things as they are, but we also need traps that they can work on or they won't know what to do when they come across the real deal. Makes sense, Einsak said, then looked towards Mare. Is that something you can take care of on your end? No, Mare shook his head. The types of traps that I have available are too strong for the weaker floors. I can set aside areas where they can be placed. Is that good enough? Einsak turned his head back to Mary, who ran a finger over her lip in thought. I'll check around with our members to see how many can do that work, she said. We have at least a handful that can probably manage it. Scrounging up the parts might be a pain, though. It's better than nothing. Einsak looked around at the assembled adventurers, then to Mare. Anything else? Anyone? Good. We need to get to the guild to go over the results with tonight's party. Ilan, can you check and see if there are any mages that can clean them up before they enter the city? Those mirrors don't deliver odors, but I can just imagine what they smell like right about now. Ludmilla sat up from her bed groggily, stretching her sore arms over her head. The pain affirmed that the events of the previous evening had not, in fact, been some sort of surreal dream. Smashing endless swarms of cockroaches with her shield was not what came to her mind when she thought about adventuring, but now it was the only thing she could think of. Letting her hands flop down loosely onto her blanket, she scanned her room. Despite the fatigue from the previous day, it appeared she had still awoken earlier than usual. There was no light coming from behind the drapes and she could not hear the sounds of her household preparing for the morning. She looked around her bed for the documents she fell asleep reviewing. They had accumulated while she had been away for most of the evening. Failing to find them, she poked her head over the edge of the bed to see if they had fallen to the floor, but only found her slippers, which were neatly arranged below. It seemed that Amelia had cleaned up Ludmilla's solar after she had fallen asleep. Her books and folders were arranged on a desk that had been brought in from another room in weeks previous, and her equipment had been arranged neatly near to the stand on which her only dress had been mounted. Her gaze hovered over the now too short forest green dress purchased just over a year ago. Every time she thought she would have a portion of her schedule free to head out and shop for additions to her wardrobe, it seemed that some urgent matter would find her and push the errand further along. It wasn't limited to shopping, either. If it wasn't paperwork, it was one appointment or another in the city. If it wasn't something domestic, the Adventurer Guild would come calling. She supposed that she would need to give up for the time being and allow Amelia the task of having new clothing made while she herself was away on one duty or another. Too much time thinking about her schedule had roused her to full wakefulness, so Ludmilla swung her legs out from under the bed covers and headed over to the desk. Stretching lazily as she stood over it, she mentally reviewed what was to be done for the morning. A message from the cathedral had been delivered while she was away and, by the time she returned home, it was too late to respond. There were several additional requests for goods for her domain, which needed to be added to the cargo sent out to Call-in Village before the ship returned from upriver. Taking her seat to sort through what needed to go where, her hand brushed up against a small box that had not been there before. Curious, she opened the container and found a small mirror on the inside of the lid. The interior was separated into several compartments. It was a jewelry box, but the sole article of jewelry that lay within was a dull, grey tag, the iron plate bestowed on her by the Adventurer Guild after their team had returned and a short review delivered on their performance. 4 of their number had advanced to the next rank while 2, Pen and Themis, had been held back on account of the outcomes being so irregular that they had not been able to fully demonstrate their capabilities. They had accepted the reasoning with no discernible disappointment, and were currently on standby to recover their mana for an exercise later in the evening. The next group of copper ranks would be tested before lunch. Ludmilla and Howe were requested to set up several simple traps in advance, so she needed to sort out her administrative duties before mid-morning. Not 20 minutes later, there was a knock at the door. "My lady, are you awake?" Amelia's voice asked softly from the hall. "Yes, come in," Ludmilla answered without looking up from her work. The door opened and a lamp appeared, followed by her lady's maid. At some point in the weeks previous, Amelia had caught on to her mistress' ability to see in the dark, so she always now came with her own lighting just in case she needed it. The existence of talents was commonly known, their manifestations often being useless to the point that one may as well not have theirs at all. Having one of practical use was uncommon and considered a boon, but, as a whole, they were merely considered a part of the countless unexplainable mysteries of the world. Talents were not questioned or examined overly much unless they were exploited for renown, or happened to become a topic of discussion concerning renowned individuals. As a result, Amelia was not aware of the full extent of Ludmilla's talent. The maid's understanding amounted to her mistress having some sort of dark vision. Ludmilla supposed that it didn't really matter when it came down to domestic affairs, anyways. Amelia drew open the drapes, and she set about her work as Ludmilla continued with her own. "How will you be dressed this morning, my lady?" "I have to head out to do something for the Adventurer Guild soon, so just the regular equipment will do," Ludmilla said as she began to divide up her orders for the morning. "Actually, before that, was there anything new in the letter room?" "I will take a look, my lady," Amelia replied. "Where would you like breakfast this morning?" "In the dining room. Keep it light, though, I'll be doing a lot of running around this morning, but I'll be back for lunch so I can make up for it then." Ludmilla stood and flipped through her papers again, adding the separated orders to her file folder. Between them, Terence and Rodney could have them out within the hour, before most of the other manors sent out their own. Amelia appeared at the door with a new set of messages, placing them on the desk before her. "There's a letter as well, my lady," Amelia said as she placed the new work onto the desk. "House Wagner, I think?" "I guess we're not the only ones working early," Ludmilla murmured as she broke open the wax seal and unfolded the letter. Lady Corlin is in the city, and Wagner is hosting lunch." "Your response, my lady?" "It's early in the afternoon," Ludmilla said, "so I should be back well before then. Have Rodney relay my response on his way out." She scanned through the other messages. The first was a cargo manifest of the shipment that had departed the village at some point in the night. It was still entirely timber slated for construction purposes, and most of the proceeds went towards sending needed goods back upriver. Demand had waned for a brief period when the patches of forest that had been allowed to reach Erantle's walls had been cleared away, but the new policies for improving the capital and the ongoing development of the new city quarter devoured the brief abundance. If she left her inventories to the Merchant Guild to auction off, there would be a buyer for everything before the shipment made it halfway to harbor. The second was a message from Morin Bohr, who had in turn received a message from a past associate, asking if they could migrate to Warden's Vale. A dubious expression fell over Ludmilla's face as she recalled the man's tale from his younger days. She would need to ask about it in person the next time she had an opportunity. The third message was a compilation of various questions and requests from her tenants in the village in the newly populated hamlet. Nonna sent these once every few days, but they usually came in at night since she did not consider them a priority and composed them in her idle time. There were worries over housing with the new tenants trickling in, others requested approval for apprenticeships under the handful of tradesmen that now populated the village. More still were smaller things that she was already well familiar with after years of managing the barony under her father, minor disputes, questions about taxes with the upcoming summer harvest and petitions for various conveniences that were not currently available. They were things she could think on before replying to, nothing seemed overly urgent. It occurred to her that new administrative staff would be necessary soon in Warden's Vale, or she would be buried trying to keep up with the petty business of her territory. Most of the questions and petitions posed by her tenants were matters that she could deal with personally in the village, but with other settlements on their way she needed to find some way to delegate responsibility. She caught herself as her mind drifted off to how she might organize her administration and rose to her feet to get dressed. There was no time for idle planning. Upon leaving her solar, Ludmilla almost bumped into a pair of skeletons bringing bundles of laundry down from the upper rooms. Whoever was directing them was nowhere to be seen. She poked her head out of the doorway to watch them before entering the hallway. "Have you figured out a way to identify which undead are being directed by different people?" Ludmilla asked as she followed them down the stairs. "Not directly, no," Amelia answered. "Willuvian is responsible for laundry, so those should be hers. Luluvian does most of the cleaning downstairs, so the ones working down there are usually hers. Terra's help is usually in the kitchen or cleaning around the house, and the footmen are usually taking care of things outside. They're quite helpful with moving things around inside, as well. So no one accidentally orders away someone else's assistants?" "That's possible, I suppose." Amelia tilted her head curiously at the thought. "I haven't ever seen it happen though. If they're not doing the tasks you've set them to doing, surely you'd recognize that they aren't the ones you've been working with." "When things get hectic and there are a lot of them around," Ludmilla said as they entered the dining room, "I worry that something like that could happen. If there are dozens of skeleton laborers working on a field and 4 for every farmer, it might be easy to commit that sort of error since they're all doing similar things. We should find out sooner rather than have it happen accidentally. While I'm out, have the Lynham sisters try to usurp control of each other's assistants, then try it between the different staff members." "Yes, my lady." The drapes of the dining room had been drawn open but, as the sun had not risen above the far wall, the table was cloaked in gloom. A single set of utensils had been laid out on a fresh linen tablecloth for her use. She seated herself at the head of the table and, as breakfast was served by her housekeeper, Ludmilla separated the 2 folders that she had set on the side. Amelia moved about the chamber, lighting the fixtures. "Mrs. Roche," she said, "these are errands for the footmen. I've marked out their files for use from this point onwards." "The human footmen, I take it?" Terra said. "That's right," Ludmilla smirked. "Also, was there anything around the manor that needs to be addressed?" The housekeeper was silent for several moments. "Well, my lady, the fireplace in the hall is still demolished. That's something we've been waiting on for a while, though. I think you mentioned renovating the hall as well at some point, so it's probably something that will have to wait until then. There have been no concerns expressed by the manor staff in general, but I believe there are a couple of things that should be brought to your attention." Ludmilla looked up from her meal. "It's a matter that needs to be discussed at length, I think." Terra seemed wary as she spoke. "When you have the time, of course. It isn't something that will go away anytime soon, but seeing how busy it is at the moment I do not wish to interfere with your work." "I see." Ludmilla furrowed her brow. "How about around dinner today, then? I should have a little time to spare." "That's very well, my lady. Let's do that." The mounting hesitation in her housekeeper's voice caused the seed of worry to sprout in Ludmilla's thoughts. "It's not something bad, is it?" Ludmilla asked. "No, my lady," Terra replied. "I would not consider it a good thing, nor a bad thing in itself." If Terra's goal was to keep her from being distracted from her work, she was doing a poor job of it. Ludmilla sighed as she attempted to push any thoughts about the mysterious upcoming conversation with her housekeeper.